Well, hello, and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. I really do appreciate it. We've got a lot to talk about, so we will just jump right in. But the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is introduce yourself and explain to the crowd here your relationship with BIM, or your group's relationship with BIM. And then from there, we'll get into the nitty-gritty. So, Dr. O'Brien, I'll start with you.
All right, well, thanks for that. I'm Dr. O'Brien and my students and build everybody else. I guess for BIM, I was working with BIM starting in 1988 when it was called 3D CAD, doing some very early work with Stone and Webster modeling with CATIA back then on a RISC RS6000 workstation. I've been looking at it from an applied sense ever since. I think today I'm putting my infrastructure hat on, where we've worked extensively with the Texas Department of Transportation and some of their early adoptions of 3D, 4D, and other technologies for trying to look at how, from an owner's perspective, of using technology to resolve projects, resolve conflicts, and improve project performance. The other hat I wear is I'm also the Associate Director for Technology for the Construction Industry Institute, which is a large research member-driven institute of here at the University of Texas, but has an international presence, has major owners. Bechtel is one of our founding members, I believe, and ExxonMobil, Dow, Shell, and other people are part of that team. So I'm very happy to represent them as well. Thank you.
Corey.
Corey Johnson, Senior Director at Bentley Systems. Bentley Systems, most of you will know of MicroStation or Open Roads, Geopack inroads. I spent about 20 years doing road and bridge design. Went to work for Bentley, spent several years with Bentley, went out into the construction market for a few years, and now I'm back at Bentley for the last 6. So I've had the unique experience of doing road and infrastructure design, but also in the last 10 years I've branched out into building, industrial, and many other areas, and seeing how they use building information modeling far different than we do in like infrastructure in the U.S.
Adam.
Great. Hello, Adam Sisler. I'm a Senior Solutions Engineer at Hexagon Geosystems. Currently working on an initiative, Make Tech Matter, with our Building Solutions Group, where we're taking multiple different technologies that are under the Hexagon umbrella and really making them work so we can start to address a lot of the siloing that happens with a lot of different construction technologies. My background is I was an apprentice carpenter in Seattle about 20 years ago. So I went through the carpenter's apprenticeship. So I've actually been building buildings out there. I journeyed out, went back to school, and got into the office side of things doing project engineering. So I've managed every scope possible, and I've done it the old way, 2D, stamping RFI sets, in a trailer, all the way up to the digital, the digitalization. And so for the last 10 years, I was part of the VDC team at a large general contractor in Seattle. And about 7-8 years ago, I started an innovation R&D department within that general contractor, got my drone license. I worked on our AI initiatives, VDC, AR, VR, digital twins, and essentially just finding efficiencies through all of those different technological routes.
And so I was hoping, William, maybe I'll start with you. Maybe give us an overview of BIM, and for anyone who's asking, what does that acronym mean? It is Building Information Modeling. It's not new, it's been around, but how today is it benefiting construction and infrastructure projects? And I thought you'd be a great candidate to tell us the difference between using BIM on a construction or infrastructure project.
Sure, and so BIM is a big word for building information modeling. I think when people hear the word BIM, they immediately think of the 3D model or ND model, but really we're talking about a digital representation of the project. And I think if I very kind of in a nutshell think about the difference between, say, BIM in a commercial enterprise and BIM the infrastructure project, I think the geospatial aspects of the infrastructure project are very important. And Kelly's presentation was excellent of really bringing out the GIS-centric nature of a distributed area. And certainly when you're in a horizontal construction or infrastructure project, that aspect becomes more important to the representation of the model. Perhaps the use of the word digital twin might be better than BIM in that sense of having a new way to think about the model completely with both the correct attributes of the structure, but also the geospatial connections to utilities, et cetera.
And if you gentlemen have anything to add, feel free to jump in. Otherwise, go ahead.
No, I think you mentioned it very well. The one thing that I've learned in all my travels and dealing with different organizations, the roadway and the infrastructure world in the U.S., we're a little behind where the building market has been, where the European market is. You know, adding in the engineering data, the building information modeling, like you said, everybody thinks it's a 3D model and it's specifics. But what if you could put in, you know, existing metrics and track the history of other projects that use those same components? And then you can check and understand, is this the right piece of equipment, the right lighting to use in this facility? We have historical data on it. So now when you start to understand the data, not only from the engineering, but the historical, the operations, you can actually make better decisions even early on in design. So it changes how everybody leverages that model. It's a digital representation, but it also can be the historical and give you analytics earlier.
Yeah, and just, I like the distinction there, you know, BIM is not just the model. The key there is information. Just like I draw the distinction when I talk about virtual design and construction, or VDC, you know, it's not necessarily all about the technology, it's really about the people and the processes. So if you think about people and processes and information, that's really where you're going to get the most value out of any of these kind of buzzword BIM, VDC things that we're talking about.
And through the years, it's been a bit of a slow burn, if you will, but things are accelerating pretty quickly. And we'll get into some of the technology that's driving that, and we'll talk about digital twin. But I am curious, what over the last few decades, what was preventing that adoption that we're seeing now? Even data now suggests, yeah, close to 100% of large firms are using building information modeling. But when you get down to those smaller firms, we're looking at a number closer to 30%. Mm-hmm. So overall, industry-wide, yeah, we're 70% or over on firms that are using it or groups that are using it. But that seems like a big divide. So what's prevented some of those smaller ones from getting BIM inside? And I'll start with you, Adam.
Yeah, definitely. I would say from experience, even just inside of our large GC, we actually spun up a training program to basically run everybody in the company through, you know, what is BIM and kind of how to operate within the model so that we could actually get more efficiency out of, you know, all of the interaction we're having. So there's a huge education piece, and there's also a, you know, people are hesitant because they think it has such a large learning curve, but a lot of that is changing with the different systems, and we'll get into, you know, more advanced technologies, but as we start to have AI co-pilots and we start to have, you know, generative, you know, solutions or, you know, automatic coding for certain things, like I think we're going to have more accessible routes into, you know, modeling, but I would say that it's the education piece. Really has been kind of the hindrance, along with cost and the silo, the walled garden effect of, you know, your different solutions. You know, this solution doesn't talk with this solution, or, you know, hey, this one's cheaper, but it doesn't do this. There's just so many things to choose from.
I've got a different spin on it.
Yeah.
There's a part of it is contractually. A lot of the smaller projects, they're time and material still. Yeah. There's no incentive, and they mentioned it earlier, you know, like the time sheeting and what incentive do I have? Why does it matter that I go faster? If there's not an incentive, nobody's going to do extra for no pay. So that's why you see the larger firms, they're doing the design builds, but the design bid builds, which are still very prevalent, there's, until you change those contracts, until you change what the actual deliverable is, you're not going to see them adopt those technologies.
Yeah, I would agree with all that, and I was just thinking over the, 4 years away from 40 years of looking at this type of technology implementation. The answer used to be the technology wasn't ready or was still niche. We're largely beyond that. It would be insane to say there's still no hiccups, but it's really not the technology anymore. It's the people, the training, the expectation, the contracts, and frankly, the expectation of deliverables in our environment. TxDOT is just now, for the first time in a project in San Antonio, having a model-based deliverable system where the design of record is the 3D model, and they're doing pretty much everything as digital as possible. Before that, everything was a 2D plan set, right? And so you would take maybe a 3D model from a sophisticated contractor, dumb it down to 2D, and then once you go there, it's hard to come back up. And so getting out of the requirements, and so changing our contracting language, changing our expectations, changing the way we do business, that's the challenge, but also the opportunity now.
Yeah, great points. I mean, bringing that up, that it's the contract, right? You're contracted to 2D, right? It's not mandated for 3D yet. So that's a huge divide right there. Yeah.
And I'm so glad we brought up education already. That was one of my questions. Do we need more education on BIM? I think the answer to that's probably yes, but who needs to be supplying that, and who's going to benefit the most from absorbing it?
Everybody will benefit. Who needs it? It's always situational. It's the context. A lot of the presentations today, the gentleman that did the Caterpillar presentation, he didn't have a lot of questions at the end because I think he did a fantastic job explaining it, and we all understood what he was talking about. Now the problem is, what can I do with a 3D model? What are the advantages? And the challenge is, even management needs to be educated on it, because they don't have all the answers. They don't know where the value is of what happens if I add this little bit of data early on. Can I use it in the construction processes? Because the designers don't always understand the contractors, and the contractors don't ever trust the designers. So you really need to educate even the most senior folks there's value in data.
Yeah. One of the things I do in my current role, working with Hexagon Construction Analysis Portal, that's kind of like our web-based portal where we actually can bring in, the 3D model, the point cloud scans. We actually run AI analysis on those. But the point I'm making here is that it's in a web-based portal that we essentially, there's unlimited seats to it. We don't kind of do seat gatekeeping, so that we can bring the foreman, the superintendents, the people that are typically, afraid of breaking something in the model, or they don't know how to navigate in the traditional 3D modeling platforms. We're taking that, and a VDC person who does have that expertise is helping to get it into, say, the portal in a format where just with a mouse and just navigating like Google Street View, anybody, and it's can walk through the model, can turn on the point cloud, can squeeze more value out of those assets that we're spending all the money in creating, on top of getting the analysis out of it as well. But making it more ubiquitous, making it more accessible, that's going to put more eyeballs on it, and that's going to give you more value out of those things.
To sort of link your previous question to this one, where we have seen adoption, and Kelly's case I think is a great one, is where a firm can really see the benefits within itself, and it makes it very easy to articulate what those benefits are and how do you adopt. And so as you've seen in the commercial space, 3D models and BIM models be very useful and have a higher uptake because they got to a level of sophistication that the tools were easy for the teams to manipulate and use themselves. And we're at a point now where to take that next level of the technology to have full digital supported delivery requires us to move across those boundaries and get past the contracts, but also the work processes and the understandings. And that's a very difficult thing to do because you're asking people to get out of the way they know how to work and to work in a different way. That's hard. Just to kind of put a very pragmatic story to it, in my other hat at CII, we had an ideation session where one of the technology committee deliverables was, let's provide some guidance for model-based deliverables. How do we get 3D models as the standard? What do we do about that? What's the business conditions? We thought that was great. Bring it to a meeting, one of the business guys is like, how is that going to solve my problems? Right? Why would I want that? I know how to work today in 2D. Why is that solving the other problems I have? And for us, it's obvious, but for him, it's not, right? And we need to bring those people together to have a good conversation.
And there might be some, there might be some confusion too that this is specifically for the design phase and that it ends there once we hit construction. There's even some chatter that this is going to replace AutoCAD, but that's not really what's happening, and those two things kind of are going to continue on with or without each other, for better or worse, right? And so maybe myth busting a little bit on how BIM's not necessarily replacing anything in design, and its practicality moves well beyond that design phase. And maybe I'll go with you, William, if you had any thoughts.
Oh, well, I think for a lot of people in construction, once they see the model, it's pretty easy to digest its utility for interferences, coordination, things like that. Again, it's getting it outside of the immediate use of that individual, whatever role they have. That is very difficult. I think that the real challenge we have on the design side, because the models should be created early on in the design, is making that product useful to the downstream consumer, whether it's construction, startup and commissioning, operations, and so on. And those all have somewhat different flavors. And so that many people have to take a model and then recast it for what they use it for. And that's currently is a barrier to use.
Well, and one of the things that we've seen, my time in construction, what contractors do with data is just mind-blowing. When you do a beautiful design model, the designer doesn't know how the contractor is going to construct it. But then you also have to allow the contractor to add data. They're going to add in intelligent information. They'll put a cost code or an omni-class number that the designer doesn't. Why? Because then they can track that, and they know the historicals, they know their production rates, they know their work steps. All of this is now important for the contractor, and then you also can pass that to operations and maintenance, and then you have a common language. Because I like this example, a pipe is not a pipe is not a pipe. If you design a pipe with Autodesk, Bentley, Trimble, Hexagon, somebody, the data properties are different. You know, it may say 6 inch, and it may say 6 inch, or it may say 0.5 feet, or it may, whatever. When somebody wants to gather that information in a big federated model, how do you actually find all of that information? When you start putting some logic to it that's consistent, like a cost code or an omni-class, then it makes it a lot easier for people. But you're never going to get the designers to do that. Never. Because they don't understand everything downstream, and they shouldn't. We should, as a technology provider, give them the opportunity to add the data that makes sense for them for their situations.
Yeah, and coming from the GC I was working at for the last 10 years in the VDC department, it was very typical. You have your design model, and then your MEP subs are contracted to do their own models. So you're doing clash, you know, in the design phase. But then, similar to the solar, where you're checking with the drones for installation errors, that sort of thing, you're using, you know, the 3D model throughout the construction process. Whether you're using it now to grab points for layout, whether you're, site superintendents are doing planning or forecasting, doing analysis on workflows, that sort of thing. We were a self-performed concrete shop. So what we would do also is take that designer's model, exactly what these gentlemen were saying, and we would then remodel the concrete portion for how we were going to pour it. And then that would create our work packages. So we're putting in the cost codes, we're putting in everything so you can track labor and everything. Now, the thing that really was an aha moment for me was when, I've been in construction for the last 20 years, but to actually sit there and think about, total building life cycle. And the design and the construction is just a small piece of the overall building's life. So you're basically creating these documents and all of the 3D documentation, the photographs, everything else, all of the O&Ms, everything that gets pushed down the line into operation, the better you can have that handoff be, the more actionable and operational that can be. So you're already putting all of this money and effort into this process. Why not have it make your building even more efficient, down the road?
And I think it's important to note, you're not asking really any of the groups as this pushes down the line, you're not asking them to be anything other than what they've already been. So you're asking your architects to be architects, your builders to be builders. Yeah. The introduction of a BIM modeling system, it isn't changing necessarily what those people do. Is that right?
Yeah, correct. Well, it's changing, it's giving them the basis, right? It's It is the architectural intent, right? Then you also have your structural design that goes into that, right? And so everyone's essentially building on top of the same thing, and it's, the single source of truth idea, right? You want to be building it digitally so that you can kind of ferret out all the, issues before you build it in the real world.
I got a simple way of putting it. Let's teach our designers to model for modeling. Let's not teach them to model for paper. Because right now, the deliverables are paper, and when you do roadway and you cut cross-sections and you do those things, you want the cross-section to look fine on paper. But what you do is you miss those spaces in between the 25-foot cross-sections. You miss the details on the intersections, because you know what the paper plan or the PDF has to look like. Let's get rid of that. Let's actually model it properly and fill in all those details. And then the paper representation should be a clear reflection of the model, not the other way around. So,
I like the concept of let's model for modeling and not model for paper. I think that says it really well. I think the danger is if we think that nothing changes and we will just automate an existing paper process and now do it digitally, and that's not going to, that may be efficient in some ways, but really not give us the leverage and the power that a model can bring to us. And for me, I think the path forward for this industry, or all of our industries, is you look around what's sort of hot right now and has been in there, it's the collaborative contracting approach. How do we put all the brains together early in the projects? We're getting constructability input, we're getting operations input, as well as design input into the model, maybe your supply chain input as well for procurement. Putting all that together to an early project execution plan is really important, especially as we want to get faster deliverables. We want to mitigate risk. If we do that collaboratively, the model can be a facilitator for those conversations. And so that's, I think, is the real business case for us. But that also means more discipline early on about having a plan to use the model that all the parties agree with.
Yeah, and another curveball in there as well is that, a lot of projects start, in SD, right? You're starting to build concrete, that piece is designed while some other parts of the building are being, finalized. We've had that experience, the GC I was working at, multiple different change orders, multiple different supplemental, drawing sets come out, but, you have a short schedule. You have to start as early as possible, and then that's where the modeling and having everybody on the same page allows you to be nimble and flexible, as those changes come down the line. So they're not like catastrophic, issues, or you're not going to miss something.
And I want to leave plenty of time to look forward and leave some space for questions as well. So let's transition to the digital twin, and we'll be forward thinking about BIM in that as well. But maybe explain the digital twin in as plain terms as you can. We've heard a lot about it today from some excellent folks. But let's see how this relates to BIM. Again, there's this incorrect notion that digital twin's going to somehow replace BIM, and BIM's not going to exist anymore. But it seems more unlikely that these two things will coexist together and be companions with one another. Is that your perspective, Corey?
well, he said it earlier. It's a digital representation of a physical asset. Probably the simplest, best explanation. It's on the forefront of every software design company. But in essence, it's, if I click on something later on or at any stage, what should I get from it? In the past, it was a very good engineering reference of width, height, length, volume. Now it should include specs, documents, inspections, photographs, everything about it. That would be an ideal world for a digital twin. And then it passes on, and what it does for you is it shortens that time frame. I love the minutes matter comment from Kelly. That is, we can only pour concrete so fast. You can only do physical operations so fast. What can we do to improve the efficiency? What can we do to increase the profitability? Getting answers and having that widget, click on it, here's my problem, I send it to you, you get a response, and it's all recorded. A digital twin is just that. It's that digital representation of the physical item, but it should include far more than just engineering data. It should include all of it in a perfect world.
Yeah, definitely. And also, as that, it does have, part of, the model. It has a visual representation. It has the projects, O&M, the data that goes along with the project, but then also digital twin getting into, live sensors. So an example of, say, like a data center, and you can Google this, but Google on one of their data centers, was able to save 15% or reduce energy consumption by 15% by having all of their data running through their digital twin and being able to analyze in real time and basically then use that to make adjustments. So essentially getting that real feedback. All of your, imagine you're walking through the project in a future state, maybe you have your glasses on that are, you look up and you see the VAV, and it's going to have an indicator saying, hey, this filter needs changed, right? So it's going to tie into a future state where, even those items like warranty information, hey, these things need changed, is going to be even more accessible. So you're not going to get to those critical junctures where something breaks, right? You're going to be able to have sensor data telling you that it's time to do something before it's, too late.
Yeah, I'm sure there's people out there that would have a very stern definition of this is a BIM and this is a digital twin, but from my perspective, it's mostly a marketing perspective of, yeah, they're talking about the same thing and same intent. The opportunity is the digital twin, I think, speaks to a much wider audience of our clients, basically, the ones who are going to be the owner, operator, and asset providers, and they'll get it from their perspective. You bring BIM to them, what cares? Bring a digital twin, I understand what that can do for me. It's in the air, it's in the current. So I think it's a tremendous opportunity and a change for us to have better discussions about how can we deliver to them a better operating model in a virtual form that can help them with their assets, and then use that to drive the construction cycle and design cycle to do better.
Yeah.
And perhaps because the technology is changing so rapidly, and it's quite clear the savings that are available, how do we, and I say we, and I am probably speaking about the U.S. here in particular, we brought up the fact that here in America, we're a bit behind some of the other countries in terms of adoption, which means folks are losing out on the opportunity to save some money. So what needs to happen for it to become a little bit more common here in America? Does the government need to get involved, whether that's state, municipal, county, or is it something that just needs to continue to improve day by day, which, as we can see, is happening? And I didn't point that towards anyone, so how about William, if you're interested?
Sure, I'll say. So I think I've already kind of see where I'm going with this. I do think that the legal institutional environment around that we're set up for 2D drawings and specs, that needs to really change and have people start asking for different things, whether on the government side or on the commercial private side. Both of those need a lot of work to get changed, and part of the problem in the U.S., why are we behind? I'm not sure it's true everywhere. I think there's certainly probably an average, but there's pockets of excellence here. We're such a big country with so many different things, and government is so distributed, state, local, federal, it's really hard to have a centralized change.
No, I love that he started off with that. I agree. In Europe, in the UK, they enforce the Kobe standards. Right, wrong, or indifferent, it forced a change. They have a good plan. But again, the United States, I love the DOTs, but they're all special. They think they're special. Even in the end, though, they're still pouring concrete, building roads, very similar, but they have different specs, different requirements, and that's the challenge. The technology's there, but it's the legal contracts. What incentive is there to go faster? What incentive is there to turn over this deliverable when it's still contractually a red line PDF is the as-built? That's the challenge.
Yeah, understanding the incentives, mandating something is not going to work, right? Maybe not here. We probably get a lot of pushback, because I think that no group is really on the same page maybe with it, but everybody can speak to or understand incentive. So like when something like there's a technology where a tower crane can monitor all of its all of its picks, or you start to get situations where insurance companies can start to lower premiums on projects that are using some of these AI monitoring tools for, site safety reasons, that sort of thing. So once incentives catch up, I think there's going to be more use and adoption, and also technology providers like Hexagon. That's why one of the things they're working on is integrating all of these different things, so it's not as confusing. Because historically you've needed to be an expert in all of these different things, but really it's getting the software to be as easy as it can be off the shelf, right? To enable you to take your drone data, take your 360 photos, take your models, take everything from the project into a platform, and just upload it, right? And that's getting there. That's actually here now, and in the next couple of years, it's going to get easier to use and more accessible. So I could see that changing, and with the incentives to save money and save our tax dollars, right, on these large projects, there could be lots of emphasis on that.
And coincidentally, it seems like adoption of BIM would bring everybody more together. So we just said everyone's kind of far apart in terms of how they like to operate, and coincidentally, if more adoption of this happens, they'll come further together and things will get a lot easier for everybody. I do want to open it up to the floor. This is such an interesting topic. Does anybody have any questions? We've got these gentlemen for just a few more minutes. Right over here.
We've been required on start projects, more so data centers and such. And, when the team hears, we got to use BIM, they're like, and then the problem is a lot of them, don't have experience in it. It's kind of a new thing in our industry. So I think as time goes on, we'll see more people start adopting BIM, and then, the people that know how to use it and such will start emerging in the industry. But right now it's we're having to outsourcing our modeling and such, and, it kind of becomes a challenge for the construction company. But, I'm a fan of it, but, getting universal use of it is probably a little ways off yet, but just because of the experience of the folks in the project management end with it.
One thing I would suggest, and Kelly had some really good examples, when people try to implement BIM or, digital twins, they boil the ocean. They want to have very large outcomes, and I saved 30% on this job. I love that she had that, how fast they could do the pile drives. Take the small wins. Do a little bit on the project, get the small wins, make it actually actionable so that the older folks are, this made my job better. And everybody goes too far. I will just say from my experience, I haven't met hardly anybody that by default, they've set the goal small and will grow. So set the goal small, grow it. After 1 month, if you don't see an improvement in some workflow, you're not doing it right. And then when they see that and they see how it helps them, then they'll start adopt, and then they'll take the next step and the next. We've been working with, a lot of different folks, and that's the hard part is, let's scale it back. Let's saddle up in another month, and then in 3 months, and if we don't have actionable results, then we need to do something dramatically different. And that seems to help. If you come up with a huge project execution plan, we're going to be done 3 months early on a 2-year job, you're not going to get there if you don't take the small wins and build on them. Because getting adoption from the folks, timesheets, things like that, you have to get everybody to agree this is better. So take the small ones.
What he said, although I think the other side of innovation like that, if you want to make that changes, is have a plan in place to institutionalize the learning, and be able to spread it quickly so you can actually get the investment and the returns back to you. Because that first job, you may not get the investment back 100% because you're bringing outside resources to it, right? So you need to balance the maturity of how do I get started slowly and take steps, but also rapidly spread those steps to the enterprise to spread the benefits and then level up. Otherwise, you have done this once and then you've done nothing.
Yeah. I would just add, from my R&D background, I did want to give a plug for, you're going to see in the next year to 2 years, this ability with generative AI to be able to type into your computer and say, I want a model of a building, here are the parameters, and it's going to, there's already a couple products on the market, you can Google it, but doing text-based prompts to 3D model. And then from that 3D model, you're actually able to get cut sheets and everything like that. So I think there's going to be a revolution in small contractors or the contractors that aren't necessarily into VDC right now, being able to leverage something like that as it becomes reliable. Right? We're going to have to, let's go ahead and make sure we test that, right? But I think that technology is rapidly advancing in the AI space. So,
Anybody else out there? Yes, sir.
To touch on the implementation and the fact that the U.S. is behind BIM-wise, could part of the cause of that be the fact that so many municipalities don't require complete designs before issuing out permits? I've worked coordination projects where it was a bare minimum to just break ground, and the design team was making changes while we were coordinating the project, and we were only 3 floors ahead of construction. 6 floors ahead of construction on sky rises. Could that be part of the issue with the implementation in the U.S. being behind compared to other countries?
I would say, yeah. I mean, I think I was hitting on that when I was talking about working at the GC, just like you're saying, right? We're designing the plane while we're flying it, so to speak. I think that makes it so that you need that staff of 3D modelers, in-house. You need to have an in-house VDC department if you're really going to thrive at that. If you're outsourcing, then you're kind of getting to, even more issues, with the back and forth and time that it takes for all of that. So I think, yeah, the contracts are definitely keeping that, whether it's contracting to a 3D model or even just the pace of projects.
And you got to incentivize them to, if you don't have it detailed out in the contracts and there's not incentives, things aren't going to change. And it sounds terrible to say. It doesn't always have to be more money or a higher contract, but maybe there's incentives to be done early. Mm-hmm. Because if I'm done early, then I can open this up earlier. I'm generating revenue for myself. Those types of discussions need to be had. Otherwise, I got 3 months to build this job. I'm going to take 3 months to build this job. I have no incentives to be done early and have my crew work 40 hours a week plus, because I'm going to get paid time and materials. So those things tend to change. It's hard to walk away from money. They're not going to go faster and lose money. So,
I think specific to code departments, I'd say it's a rare one that has the capacity or understanding to interpret a 3D model or a model system, right? And so I think there's a huge education around that, and also an ability for either an imposed standard or an industry-derived standard of what that model looks like, so that you don't have 5 different model designations and the code agencies like, what did I just actually certify here, right? So there's de-risking for them as well, and so it's this intersection of how we work and making changes and thinking through that consistently and driving the business cases for all of those is where we right now are challenged with. And I would say in the U.S. we have that in spades, but I don't really know of any country that's really got that solved 100% yet either.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. William, Corey, Adam, appreciate it. Can you give them a round of applause?
Thank you.